What's one album that you consider to be truly perfect from start to finish? And what is it about that album that makes it flawless to you?
Hey everybody, it's Eric Bass from the band Shinedown, and you are listening to my weekly mixtape with Brian Colburn. Let me tell you something, this guy knows his stuff, so buckle up. It's gonna be good. Check it out.
What is going on, friends? Welcome to my weekly mixtape. I'm your host, Brian Colburn, and I am back this week with a very special episode. No, not like the very special episodes you would see on sitcoms in the 1980s. This is something that's a lot more fun than that. Anyone who listens to this show knows that my weekly mixtape is a celebration of all things music. And a lot of times we're making playlists or mixtapes and taking songs from different artists, bands, genres, and trying to put them all together to tell a cohesive story based on whatever that topic is for the week. But at the end of the day, the show also does a lot of interviews and we celebrate a lot of albums. Because I would be lying if I said that the album experience wasn't a massive part of what I love about music and what I know a lot of you listeners love about music. So something that I've been doing for a long time now is every guest I have on, when we're done recording the episode, I ask this little side question. What's one album you consider to be truly perfect from start to finish, and what about that record makes it flawless to you? Now, keep in mind, a perfect album does not have to be your favorite album of all time. It's just an album that you can put in, and from start to finish, you know you're about to get a no-skip experience throughout the entire record. There are no down spots for you. Then, every time I put up an early access episode over on the My Weekly Mixtape Patreon, which is patreon.com/My Weekly Mixtape. A couple days later, I drop this as a little mini bonus episode for the people that support the show a little extra. But as time goes on, I start to build a catalog of these answers. So late last summer, I tried something, and this was right before the show went on a short hiatus when my father passed away. I took these little mini episodes, answers to this singular question, and turned it into what I consider to be a large round table of people who just happen to not be together at the same time, along with bringing something new to the table, which was adding my commentary to each one of the albums discussed by these guests of the show. So what I decided to do when I relaunched the show for season 2 was continue that tradition, only expand on it a little bit. So I've asked anyone and everyone who listens to the show. So it's not just regulated to guests and the Patreon mixtapers. The floor is open. If you are a part of the My Weekly Mixtape community, I want to hear from you. And it's pretty easy to do. Send an audio file to myweeklymixtape@gmail.com and answer the very simple or very complicated question, depending on how you look at it. What's one album you consider to be truly perfect from start to finish? And what is it about that record that makes it flawless to you? I'll take care of the rest. Now, season 2 has been up and running since November, and we're starting to build up a surplus again. So I am back this evening to dive into volume 2 of the perfect album, with volume 3 to come later this fall. Now I'll add, as far as I remember, not a single album's being repeated from volume 1, so that's pretty interesting. And if that trend continues, I think the goal moving forward is going to be that every couple of months, I'm going to put out a new perfect album episode until we get to the point that the same albums are coming up over and over again. But we're nowhere near close to that, so we're going to keep this thing rolling, and it's all thanks to you, the incredible mixtaper community that has grown over the last few years. I am so fortunate to have you listening, as well as to all of the guests who have joined me to have this musical conversation week in and week out. And it just so happens that today's episode features a stacked lineup of some of the amazing guests that have joined me in season 2 thus far. So if you like what these guests are putting out in their perfect album answer, go back and check out the full episodes, because there's a lot more where each of these answers came from. And if you want to make it a little easier on yourself to go back to a specific artist, Just use the search feature I have set up over on the main website, which is myweeklymixtape.com. All right, so let's get into this. The Perfect Album, Volume 2. And I'm going to kick things off tonight with a guest that never in my wildest dreams that I think I'd be able to get on this show. And it's one that I'm extremely grateful for, that being the amazing Bermuda Schwartz of the Weird Al Yankovic Band, drummer since the first time Al performed Another One Rides the Bus on the Dr. Demento show. That is Bermuda beating on Al's accordion case. This guy is an absolute legend, and we talked for over an hour and a half about all things Weird Al Yankovic. And when we were done, we continued talking as he shared his pick for the perfect album.
Oh, boy. Well, I have to go back a long ways because it's been a long time since a single album has had everything on it that I really liked. There were artists that did that in their first few albums, and every song was a hit. Every song was great, in my mind. And I think back to Elvis Costello as my probably number one choice for every song just being great, and not a bunch of just sort of album cuts on there, but every song like standing on its own, being really good. I mean, I can go back a lot farther than that and go back and say, well, the early Beatles albums and there's a lot of stuff out there that where all the songs, I really liked all the songs, but in more modern circles, it's been a while. I couldn't think of anything in the last really 30 years where every song was just great and every song, stood up on its own. It's been a while. And that's not to say I like every new wave artist either, because not all of them had more than one or two or three great songs on per album. But Elvis Costello's first few albums, My Aim Is True, and then this year's model, and then Armed Forces. Those three albums, every song on every album was great. Now, I'm a big fan of his, and I continued buying the albums, and then it's like, I don't really like every song on this album. I don't really like, King of America, there were a couple of great songs on there. Rest of them were just album cuts. And that's fine. That's the norm. That's why his first three albums stand out. Because the norm is you have a couple, like us. I mean, like with Al, you have two or three singles on an album, or videos. And those are the lead, those are the, I dare say, important ones, I guess. And the rest of them, and the fans, may love them, and they may all be great, or they may just be, we needed to have one more original on this album, to have 12 songs so we could put it out. So this is something I've been toying with, and it's not going to be a video or a single, so it's not crucial. And we just put it on there, and it's just kind of, that's an album cut. But the fans love everything we do. If you were to ask a fan, more objective than from where I sit, they would say, I love all of the songs. There's not a single song, that you don't like of Al's. No, I love them all. And that's great. It's hard for me to, if I had to assign, figure out which of Al's albums had the most or even all great songs on them from start to finish, I would have to literally go down the list. I can't think of anything in my mind that stands out. I said, that's the definitive album. Everything on there is great. And, I don't know if I could do that.
The one and only Bermuda Schwartz with a trio of Elvis Costello albums, My Aim Is True, This Year's Model, and Armed Forces. There are so many things I love about doing this show, but when I ask this question, sometimes it brings me down a rabbit hole that I wasn't planning on going down. Prior to my discussion with Bermuda, the only Elvis Costello album that I had listened to was his greatest hits, which I own on CD. And it's not for a lack of dislike for Elvis Costello. I love that greatest hits CD. I just never took the time to go through and listen to his catalog. And based on what Bermuda said, it drove me to really say, you know what? I might not have time to do a full catalog dive right now, but I have to take time out and give these three albums a full run through. And I'm so glad I did, because as much as I love the greatest hits, I found a lot of tracks here that I had heard here and there over the years, but never quite put together in the album listen. And it really opened my mind to what a unique and incredible artist Elvis Costello truly is. Thanks to Bermuda, I am now a bigger Elvis Costello fan than I was before we talked. And honestly, it made me feel kind of guilty for waiting so long to go down that rabbit hole. If I had to choose between the three, I'd probably go with This Year's Model, because and maybe I'm being a little selfish here, two of my favorite Elvis Costello songs are from this album. The first being Pump It Up, which I was introduced to Elvis Costello when I learned that Mudhoney's song from the PCU soundtrack was actually a cover, which is what made me look up Elvis Costello in the first place. And yet people still pick on me when I talk about my love of cover songs. Had I not heard Mudhoney's version in the PCU soundtrack, I might not be the Elvis Costello fan I am today because it led me to his music. But I digress. The other song, Radio Radio, which was on the original US version of the album, and depending on which release you have, dictates where the song sits in the track listing. Because if you have the original European version, it's not even on there. But the original US version has Radio Radio to close out side 2, and then it got moved around on subsequent re-releases. So it's on there for the most part if you're buying it here in the US. So yeah, those two songs did swing the needle for me, making this year's model my favorite Elvis Costello album. But that's just me, and all three of the albums are worth their weight in gold if you haven't heard them yet, and I completely see why Bermuda chose them. In the episode with Bermuda, we talked about how Weird Al's self-titled album had almost a punk spirit to it. And after listening to these three Elvis Costello albums, I almost hear an influence there. For Al. Yes, Al was accordion based, but there's something about Weird Al's self-titled album, and that could just lie in how the album sounds when you compare it to the rest of Weird Al's discography, that gives it that punk aesthetic. And I feel like some of the aspects of Elvis Costello show in some of the songs on his self-titled album. Now, if you're a fan of Weird Al, I cannot recommend this episode with Bermuda Schwartz enough. And this is coming from someone who's been a huge fan of Weird Al for many decades. And I walked away with stories I had never heard before, and it absolutely blew my mind. And I recommend this episode to any level of fandom, from the casuals to the diehards, to hear the whole story behind his mindset, how he crafts his music, and just how meticulous he and the rest of the band are at making these songs sound the way they do. It's an incredibly fascinating discussion, and I highly recommend it. But I mentioned this punk rock spirit of Weird Al's self-titled album. So with that, I think it's only fitting to go with my next guest who personifies that pop punk spirit, that being Jaret Reddick of one of my favorite pop punk groups, Bowling for Soup, and his pick for the perfect album.
Some Nights by Fun is a
Interesting.
perfect album. And I realize that's a little bit off of where anybody that's listening to this or watching this thought I was going to go. There are a lot of perfect albums. It's just when that album hit, and just every single song on it is so fucking good. And it was just, it was different, and it wasn't, nothing like that was on the radio, and it was its own thing. And all of it, I mean, I just remember listening to it for the first time going, if this doesn't win every Grammy, then the world is an imperfect place. And you just don't feel like that a lot when you listen to music, especially for the first time. But I will never forget it. Listening to that record for the first time and going, fucking shit. Like, I don't know what happened here, but this is crazy. And I can still listen to that album, but there's actually two songs that they're not my favorite, but I think they belong on the record. But that album, I can still listen to that all the time. I listen to it if I'm like walking or on the treadmill or something. I can just put Fun Some Nights on, and I'm just happier than a pig in shit.
Such a great album. And Jaret was absolutely correct. Not an album I would picture him going with, but really glad that he did. I was actually introduced to Fun through my wife, as she is a huge Pink fan, and I discovered the band through the Just Give Me a Reason single she did with Nate Roos of Fun. And that's when I went back and discovered the album and We Are Young and the slew of hits that came from it. I mean, here in 2026, we don't talk about shelf lives for albums as much as we did back in the day. We Are Young came out in 2011, and they were still releasing singles from this album in May of 2013. So almost a full 2-year cycle for this record. And before you go and criticize me on using the term back in the day, while you might not think of this album as something to be nostalgic about, Some Nights is 15 years old this year. So yeah, back in the day. Fueled by Ramen put it out. And I mean, while the label has 21 Pilots on it, I think of Fueled by Ramen more along the lines of Fall Out Boy, A Day to Remember, Meet Me at the Altar, kind of leaning more towards the punk side of the spectrum. So in terms of what I expected from this album when I saw it was on Fueled by Ramen, it was kind of a surprise for me. Leaning more towards that power pop, pop rock, indie type vibe, but it works so well. It's got elements of Queen throughout the album when you think about the vocal harmonies, the guitar work from Jack Antonoff, who went on to produce pretty much every major pop artist you can think of at this point. Recently, Sabrina Carpenter, Doja Cat, Pink, who I mentioned earlier, Florence and the Machine, and obviously all the stuff he's done with Taylor Swift. Considering it was Fun's sophomore and final album, when you look back at it, there is this bit of lightning in a bottle impact to the album that I think is cool given its longevity and given what it's done for the different members of the band. And it was definitely an outside the box pick from Jaret, so I love where he went with this one. If you're a fan of Bowling for Soup or pop punk or just the stories behind the band, not many people realize that Jaret Reddick, the lead singer of Bowling for Soup, is also the voice of Chuck E. Cheese. So if you've been in a Chuck E. Cheese and you heard that voice and you thought it sounded familiar, yeah, it's familiar for that very reason. What a fun interview that was. One of the more fun ones I did back in 2025. Highly recommend you checking that out. And as well as some of the new Bowling for Soup music that's going to be coming your way later this year. Now, when we do a topic like the perfect album, this is not something like a regular playlist where each song is going to kind of weave into the next. And while I could probably try to do that with these records, an album experience, as far as I'm concerned, is a very individual and subjective experience versus a playlist that can kind of weave in and out where maybe you don't like one song, but the playlist is going to take you somewhere else. An album kind of tells a full story from that artist or band. And the glue that holds them together in this episode is the fact that everyone that you're hearing besides me tonight is a past guest on the show, be it a musician, friends of the show, or fellow music podcasters, which is where I'm going to go with this next pick, because up next is New Jersey rock radio legend Terrie Carr, host of the Carr Stereo podcast, with her choice for the perfect album.
I'm going to go with the Pretenders' debut.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm going to take a little turn here, because people would say, oh, she's going to do a Van Halen record or Rolling Stones record. I'm going to go with the debut from the Pretenders. I think there was everything on that album. It can be punk rock. It could be all about the songwriting. I thought Chrissie Hynde was a game changer for me when I put the needle down and heard Precious for the first time. I never heard anything like it. Here was this empowered woman who was fronting this band, and she wasn't going to take any shit. There's an amazing cover, I think better than the original of the Kinks' Stop Your Sobbin'. You've got songs like Brass in Pocket, which is beautiful. She's emoting, the line, I'm special, so special is just such a classic sound. Mystery Achievement, brilliant. Tattooed Love Boys. These were also songs that were all over MTV. And that song just that whole album, every song on that album just encompasses everything about what a musical journey should be for the listener taking it with a band who was not at the time for me one of my favorite bands, a Rolling Stones or a Van Halen or an Elton John, artists, AC/DC artists I grew up listening to. When I first heard Pretenders 1, I didn't even know who they were. And it just took me to another place. It was an Almost Famous kind of moment for me, when you put the needle down and everything kind of goes foggy. And I think a perfect record from start to finish. Hats off to Chrissie Hynde. She's still doing it. I still go to every Pretender show I possibly can, whether she's opening for Stevie Nicks or headlining at the Count Basie Theater. The band is still on fire, and she is still, to me, the queen of rock and roll. So Pretenders won, my pick.
I mean, if there was a way to sum up Pretender's self-titled album, obviously Terrie Carr would be the one to do it. Absolute masterpiece of an album from an iconic band who shared the stage with the widest spectrum of artists, like hard rock acts such as the Foo Fighters and Guns N' Roses, as well as classic rock mainstays like U2, Stevie Nicks, Phil Collins, you name them. Pretenders have either influenced them or shared the stage with them. Chrissie Hynde truly helped pave the way for female artists in the 80s and moving forward into the 90s. There's a lot of 90s female artists that I feel hat tip Pretenders music. And it is so apparent, even in pop culture, when shows like Friends bring her on as a guest. That's not just a random guest. That was done with a love of the music. So nothing but great things to say about this album, and nothing but great things to say about Terrie Carr over on the Carr Stereo podcast. If you're not listening to what she's doing, she is one of the best to do it. I mentioned it on our Modern Power Ballads episode. She is someone that I look up to as an interviewer. She always has heavy hitters on her show. It's a who's who of the music industry. She is New Jersey rock radio royalty, and I'm glad that she was kind enough to come on the show and spend an hour talking music with me. Always a pleasure catching up with Terrie and seeing what she's got going on over on Carr Stereo. But because she brought in the Pretenders, which is, I would say, an influential female-fronted act, and because this show is my weekly mixtape, music discovery, and nostalgia, I feel like the Pretenders touches that nostalgia chord a little bit. Now I want to touch on the discovery side of the spectrum here and pivot to a band I had on just a few weeks ago. Parker Barrow, Megan Kane, and Dylan Turner were here to talk about their story and their music, and they are a band that, if you have not heard them yet and you are into Southern rock, you need to have them on your radar. They are burning down 2026 with authority. Their new album, Hold the Mash, has been on constant play since I had a chance to sit down with them, and this is an album that, if you haven't heard it, you need to have in your rotation. However, what better way to whet your appetite for that episode than by hearing Megan and Dylan's take on the perfect album?
So my answer is going to be a little different than that probably y'all are expecting. I know Dale's answer, so I'm not going to say that. I do agree with his answer, but the album I've currently been listening to is The Art of Loving by Olivia Dean, that I can listen to top to bottom, and I am just like enthralled with her performance, with the delicacy of her music. It's so impacting to me. Like, it's been a long time since I mean, we love the Black Crowes, we love Tedeschi Trucks, and there's the Allman Brothers. I think which album do we have? Is it the Eat a Peach album? Mm-hmm. That one's perfect front to back. But recently, finding a new artist is something I haven't done in a while, and finding Olivia Dean and this album, The Art of Loving, is just like from top to bottom. I listen to it probably like 4 or 5 times a day. So
every day
every day for like almost a year now since it came out. But it is, to me, it just fills my soul with so much joy and like happiness, and like she just embodies, I think, beautiful sounds. So I'm thankful for finding that album. But for me, that's my album.
That album is an absolute vibe, so I love the pick.
Incredible, yeah.
And now, Dylan, you've had some time to think this one over, but she said she already knows your answer.
He knew right from the start.
I knew before you had the question out of your mouth. There's one album that I love a lot of records, but my absolute favorite record is Amorica by the Black Crowes, which is sort of like, the first 2 were such big records, and Amorica was kind of, I think it had, they say it had a lot to do with some of the artwork, and it didn't get in stores and all of that. But man,
I remember that controversy.
Yeah, I love that record. There's just an attitude and a swagger to that record that I think is unmatched. It's the Black Crowes, man. Like that is the Black Crowes, and I've always loved that record. I think it's some of the first stuff that I heard from them when I was growing up. My dad used to tell me a story that I think he had bought maybe a cassette tape of it while he was traveling for work and put it in, and like he listened to it the first time and was like, "Oh yeah, it it was good, and then it just crept back into his mind, and the next thing you know, like, he wore that tape out, like, couldn't get enough of it, and I guess I kind of just caught that same bug, but I think it's just the attitude, that comes with those songs, and I don't know, it's just
Track listing.
Yeah,
There's
it's great.
nothing. There's nothing.
They do a
wrong with that.
cool little musical segue halfway through that record,
Mhm.
from I think it's Wiser Time, Ballad of Urgency into Wiser Time.
Yeah.
And I just think it's so cool when bands do stuff like that. Like, we love to do that in our shows, but for a band to do that on a record, I was like, man, that is just so cool. So I love it. I could listen to, I think last year for like our Spotify recap, I don't remember the specific numbers.
It was
But like,
ridiculous.
let's say, we listened for like 60,000 minutes. I think like 58,000 of those minutes were not the Black Crowes, but Amorica. So a little obsessive at times with it, but man, I just love it to death. It's a great record.
And since Dylan was just waxing poetic about his love for the Black Crowes, in the episode that I had them on, we talked about the band's cover of Black Crowes' My Morning Song, which is on Hold the Mash. As a big fan of cover songs, I love what they did with this rendition, and we dive into the story of where they took their version of this classic Crowes track. Now, since we're on this blues rock kick with the Black Crowes, I think for now we're going to stay in that lane and go with a guest that I am so grateful to have had on this show multiple times now, that being blues rock legend Kenny Wayne Shepherd, who joined me earlier this year to talk about the 30th anniversary of his debut album, Ledbetter Heights. We talk about 3 decades of hindsight on an album that catapulted him into the music scene when he was 17 years old, along with the new re-recording sessions that they did to celebrate the album's 30th anniversary. It is an in-depth look at 3 decades of history with an album that honestly still sounds as relevant today as the day it was released. It's always a pleasure talking music with Kenny. But before we hung up the line, I got a chance to ask him what his pick was for the perfect album.
If I just had to off the cuff, I would say that Muddy Waters record, Hard Again, just because like when you listen to that, it's the perfect production of like, you can hear that these guys are just playing music in the studio and they're having a blast doing it. You can feel that energy. It comes across to the listener. And that's always been my goal, is to try and make records that sound like we're performing live and that we're not trying to, to fabricate something in the studio, that we're actually trying to capture the energy of that live performance.
Now, even though the 30th anniversary celebration of Ledbetter Heights goes through the end of 2026, where you can catch the band on tour, Kenny Wayne Shepherd is already working on his next project, which we dip into a little bit on the episode, and that is a rock covers album. You already know how I feel about cover songs if you've listened to this show more than once. And he drops a few breadcrumbs that have me ready to rock on this album when it drops next year. And hopefully Kenny will be back for a third time to dive into those songs, because you know me, I love me some covers, and obviously Kenny Wayne Shepherd is one of the best. If you've heard any of his covers in the past, you know the standard that he's going to bring to him, so stay on the lookout for that. Now, since we're coming up to the 50-yard line of this perfect album episode, I want to take a moment to remind everyone listening that every guest you've heard so far on this week's episode has a full episode in the My Weekly Mixtape archives. So if you want to go and check those out, you can do so over at myweeklymixtape.com. And now we're going to continue the conversation with guests that have appeared on the show, and something that I am extremely grateful for is the My Weekly Mixtape Patreon community. These are the biggest supporters of the show, the people who I have the most dialogue with, either on the Patreon forums, on the Discord, or on social media. They mean the world to me. They really help bring the show to the next level week in and week out. And one of those guests was Chad Lamasa, who joined me for a full episode this season where we discussed artists that are on the rise, your next favorite band. This is definitely leaning into the discovery side of what My Weekly Mixtape is all about, and I am so glad that Chad brings that aspect to this show because, yes, it feels good to look back and reminisce about all these songs that we know and love, but there's so much amazing music that is coming our way now as well as leading into the future. I like to keep my finger on the pulse of these bands as well because these are going to be your next artists that one day down the road you are nostalgic about. So I am grateful that Chad came on the show to talk about 10 of these artists and bands, and now he's here to talk about his pick for the perfect album.
I'm going to go with Bully, Losing. I discovered her the same time I discovered Weekend Friends, and her song Feels the Same came on and just blew me away. I just was instantly in love with it. I went and bought both the album because that one and her next album had already come out by the time I'd heard this song. So I ordered both of them and then pre-ordered her third album very quickly because that's how much I loved it. And this album is just, it's such a visceral, like she's got this punk energy to her, but I think it leads a little bit more towards punk than pop punk. But I love every song on that album. I just can't. If I'm going to play that album, it's getting played all the way through every time.
Chad is a big part of the My Weekly Mixtape community. I'm glad to have him on board. He's very active on the Discords and over on the Patreon. And I sincerely appreciate all the love and support he shows this show week in and week out. If you're listening and you'd like to become a part of the My Weekly Mixtape Patreon community, you can do so over at patreon.com/My Weekly Mixtape. Now, at the beginning of Chad's answer, he talked about Weekend Friends, which he discovered at the same time as Bully. Weekend Friends is somebody that, spoiler alert, Chad and I talked about on the Your Next Favorite Band episode of the show. However, I was also fortunate to have Sonia Sturino of Weekend Friends on the show to talk about their Feels Like Hell album in depth. So if you enjoyed the conversation that Chad and I had on the Your Next Favorite Band episode and you want to dive a little deeper into the Weekend Friends world, you can do so over on the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com. Once again, an album that includes an amazing cover. And in this instance, it's the band's run through of Edna Swap's Torn. Most people are familiar with Natalie Imbruglia's hit version of the track. But if you haven't heard Weekend Friends version, you are missing out. This band is all things 90s alternative rock, punk, hard rock. I cannot classify this band in a genre. They cover such a wide array of music that it fills so many holes for me, as I am somebody who's very eclectic with my musical tastes. And they are on the rise in 2026. They have already completed tours with the Wonder Years and Knuckle Puck, and now they are out with the Menzingers and Hot Water Music. If you haven't heard them yet and you are fans of all of the bands I just mentioned, Weekend Friends should be on your radar right here, right now. But once again, to give you a little taste of the type of conversation that Sonia and I had earlier this season, after we were done talking, she took the time to answer my question about the perfect album.
So it's the Third Eye Blind self-titled record. That's one of the big ones for me. I think that record is so evergreen. I think the way it's produced and engineered and mixed and mastered is so good. It sounds so good. The lyrics, there's just like so much yearning. I always like joke that I feel like I know he's a straight man, but he's actually a lesbian. If that makes any sense to anybody, but that's 100% like how I feel about the lyrics of their songs. Just like through and through. I like love that record. I think it's such a quintessential like rock record. So that's like the one I go to like kind of immediately.
What a great choice for an album. Third Eye Blind is one of those albums that people don't realize how massive this record was. 5 singles. Obviously, the one that everyone goes to immediately, Semi-Charmed Life, but there was also How's It Gonna Be, Graduate, Jumper, and Losing a Whole Year. That album was pumping out singles through 1997, well into 1998, because I remember both summers with Third Eye Blind nonstop on the radio. Just like I hope that Weekend Friends will be nonstop on the radio if their current trajectory continues upward as they have been having a truly breakout year. And I'm grateful that Sonia took the time out of her busy schedule to come on the show to dive into Feels Like Hell, which was such an incredible release that came out in late 2025. So I recommend you check that one out if you haven't heard it yet, and then check out our episode where we dive into the album, the collaborations with Buckethead, and everything else in the Weekend Friends universe. Next up, we're going to pivot to a guest that is very special in my podcasting journey, as she was one of the first interviews that Jay Sweet and I did way back in the day over on Tune Styles. And earlier this year, at the request of one of the Patreon mixtapers, Philip Bergman, I re-aired that interview because of the Happy and You Know It documentary that premiered on HBO Max, this being child artist Laurie Berkner. Now, this is a podcast that if you've been listening for a while, you realize is kind of genre agnostic. I cover the entire spectrum, but this was the first time I ever dove into the kindie scene or children's music scene on this show. We did it to good success back in the day in Tune Styles, but that was also pre-pandemic, so it was a different world in podcasting, and I wasn't quite sure what to expect in terms of how the episode would be received. And I have to be honest, I was blown away by the response. So earlier this summer, she released a brand new album, Walking with the Penguins, which was her first album of original tunes in 5 years, just slightly less than the last time we had spoken together. So I thought, what a perfect opportunity to bring her on the show and catch up on all the things happening in her career, as well as the children's music scene in general. And we obviously dive into this new album in depth, as well as how streaming continues to impact her world. Now, depending on where you sit in the discussion of artist royalties and streaming, her answer may or may not surprise you. So it was a fascinating discussion for me from both a musician as well as a podcaster perspective, and I hope you as the listener find that as well. Now, even if you don't have children or children's music isn't your jam, this is an episode to listen to if you're a fan of artists' stories and how they navigate the ever-changing business that is the music industry. So this is one that I highly recommend, whether or not you've got youngins in the car or not. However, this episode isn't aimed for the youngins. This is aimed for us adults and parents who are listening. So while there's nothing that's really off color in the episode that you have to worry about foul language, this is probably not something that your 3 or 4-year-old will find very interesting. Oh, and maybe they will. Who knows? If they do, have them subscribe as well. MyWeeklyMixtape.com. Anyway, after a extremely fascinating conversation about all things in her universe, she was kind enough to stay on the line just a bit longer to give me her answer for the perfect album.
Isn't this a mixtape? Like, mixtapes are flawless.
But we also like the albums too.
Yeah. I do like albums. It's just been a long time since I've listened to an album all the way through. I think the one that comes to mind for me is Paul Simon's first album. So many great songs on there. He's such a brilliant poet and such a beautiful guitar player, and has such a specific character to his voice that it like brings up so many feelings for me because of my associations with it. And it's a broad styles of music and stuff, and just every song feels good. So that's what comes to mind for me.
An album that's frequently made Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. Think Mother and Child Reunion, Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard. One of the best singer-songwriters of all time, Paul Simon. Glad he's in the discussion tonight. I'm sure there's some mixtapers out there that are also thankful to hear him brought up. Obviously, if you are into children's music, don't forget to check out all the great things that Laurie Berkner's got going on. You will not be disappointed. Her episode was such a joy. She is such a pleasure to talk music with. And speaking of talking music, we are going to go to a friend of the show and fellow podcaster, Mark Bradbourne of the Songs That Don't Suck podcast, who is not only a great podcaster, he is also part of the Patreon Mixtaper community, and I'm glad to have him there joining the discussion and participating. He's got one as well, and he was kind enough to take time out of his busy podcast schedule over at Songs That Don't Suck to chime in with his choice for the perfect album.
Perfect album from start to finish, including the hidden track, Guster, Lost and Gone Forever. When I think about the time that this came out, which was September of 1999, I had just gotten out of college, and the music scene at that point was kind of post-grunge, and Guster was bringing something that was completely different to everything else on the landscape, and it really peaked with Lost and Gone Forever's release. Every percussive hit on the album is all by hand. Brian does everything by hand on this album. The dynamic use, the vocal work, just the sequencing of the tracks is amazing. So like when you think about the typical album, by the time you get to the middle of the album, it starts to feel like filler. But when you get to track 6 on Lost and Gone Forever, you've got Center of Attention, which is a great song. And then it takes you on this journey. And by the time you get to the last 2 tracks, 2 Points for Honesty and Rainy Day, you have felt every emotion possible that music can give you. Rainy Day, in fact, is probably one of the most soul-crushing songs that I can think of. And you want to talk about perfect placement. The movie Life as a House, that song makes an appearance, and it is absolutely perfect.
Mark Bradbourne at the Songs That Don't Suck podcast. Thank you so much for chiming in and being a part of the My Weekly Mixtape community. Always a pleasure talking music with you. Guster's a band that I'm very familiar with because I have a few friends that are huge fans, but I've never gone down this rabbit hole. And one of the countless things that I love about My Weekly Mixtape is the conversations we have give me the desire to do so. So after hearing everything you had to say about Lost and Gone Forever, I have that queued up on my list to check out as soon as I'm done recording this episode tonight. So thank you for chiming in with that. And with that choice, we have now come to the last perfect album of the evening. And joining me for this one was a guest I had on at the end of last year, Eric Hirshberg, former Activision CEO turned musician, did a song for real with the one and only Aloe Blacc. Actually, that's the second collaboration he did with Aloe, the first being 2024's I Love Not Drinking. This is a pretty fascinating discussion about the negativity and pressures of social media. And that's what the song For Real is about. And I've talked about my love and hate of social media here on the show several times. And this is a song that really highlights it and brings it to the forefront. And in our discussion, we kind of dive deep into that. And it's one of the things that really made me take a good hard look at how I acted with social media. And it actually has helped change how I interact with social media moving forward. So if you haven't heard that episode, it's definitely worth checking out. And when we were done recording, Eric was kind enough to stick around for a few minutes to give his thoughts on the perfect album. And I should add, it's one that I might just agree with.
The first one that leapt to my mind, there's a bunch, but the first one that leapt to my mind is the first album from the Cars.
Oh, correct.
You like that choice, huh?
Oh, yeah. It's my favorite album of all time, man.
It's a perfect record. It's a perfect record.
I mean, I think we just became best friends here.
Well, first of all, it's 9 songs. My last album was 9 songs. I think that's the right number. I feel like just like with streaming, there's a lot of 20-song albums out there. They'd all be better if they were 9. Like there's just something about 5 songs on one side, 4 songs on the other. And then they're all perfect pop songs. Like they're just perfectly crafted. The production is timeless. It's clean. It's rock and roll, but it's also, there's a little bit of new wave 80s in it, but it doesn't sound like Depeche Mode does. It doesn't sound like the Thompson Twins. It doesn't have that 80s stamp. It could be today. It could be a Strokes album. You know, it could be kind of a modern punk album. So, and then the other thing about that band, like Rick Ocasek and Greg Hawkes, the keyboardist, and David Robinson, I think is the drummer's name. They all go together. It's all Benjamin Orr, the bass player. That's all one thing. That's all this kind of tight, locked in, slightly punkish, new wave pop. And then here comes Elliot Easton, who's like a visitor from another band. Like he's doing licks from the Berklee School of Music and bluesing it up and shredding, and it just doesn't belong. It's like a weird spice in the recipe that makes the album. Take the guitar out in your brain, take the lead guitar out, and it's a completely different album, way more boring, way more forgettable. Those riffs, that Elliot Easton element, to me is like just the thing that makes it explode. And often it's that thing where it's like, this doesn't belong in here. Why is this in here? And then that's the thing that you can't get out of your head. So to me, those are the elements. And then it's hard to get 9 perfect songs. There are 9 perfect songs on that album. Like you keep going, when are they going to run out of gas? And then you get to Moving in Stereo and you're like, nope, they haven't run out yet. It's great.
The only thing I'll argue slightly is that I say there's 6 songs on the album, because as far as I'm concerned, when Bye Bye Love starts, it has to be bookended by Moving in Stereo and All Mixed Up. I actually have them ripped as one song on my phone, because if Bye Bye Love starts, I need to hear Greg Hawk's sax solo at the end of All Mixed Up, or else it doesn't feel complete to me.
Yeah. That's interesting. So you call it 6, not because you think there's 3 duds, but because you think the last 3 are 1.
I feel like it's one piece of music because of the way they're synced together.
The producer agreed with you because there was no breaks.
Right.
Yeah, there's no silence between them. You're right. That's a great call out. Yeah, it's one big song. And it's kind of Pink Floydish in that way. Kind of has that Dark Side of the Moon feel in that way. But man, just think about that. Those three songs would be the best 3 songs on almost any other album.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not the best 3 songs on that album. It's crazy. Yeah. So, and also it's been with me for so long. There's just so few things that you liked from that long ago that you still like today. Most of them, you if you like them, it's through nostalgia. It's not, I could still just sit down, and if I heard it for the first time, I'd be like, they nailed that.
I'm not going to lie to you, sitting right behind my computer monitor. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but framed on the wall.
Oh my God. We are best friends. Look at that. That's
like,
cool.
This is my favorite album of all time. It's the album my father played over and over again. Our original vinyl copy had a skip in the beginning of Good Times Roll. And anytime I hear it on CD, my brain still hears the skip because we would put it on our cassettes growing up. So it's still like, where's the skip?
I love those imprinted audio memories that just take you back. That's like, that skip will always be there for you.
Such a fun conversation with Eric. And of course, come on, it's the Carr self-titled album. I don't think it needs to be said. My thoughts about that album, you've heard it ad nauseum over the last nearly 200 episodes now. But I do want to remind listeners that a lot of the people you've heard on this episode tonight have full-length My Weekly Mixtape episodes in the archive that you can find over at myweeklymixtape.com. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, Brian, that's a lot of guests, 10 different people, but you've had more over season 2 of My Weekly Mixtape, and you are correct if you're thinking that. So let me just say now, next week, we are continuing with 10 more selections for the Perfect Album, Volume 3, featuring past guests Warren Haynes, Dryden Mitchell of Alien Ant Farm, Amanda Leiberg of Eva Under Fire, Jake Thistle, Chris Crabb of The Strike, author Stephen Blush, more of the Patreon Mixtaper community, and so much more. And we're going to be talking about albums from a wide array of eras and genres, just like you heard tonight. So expect the unexpected and another fun, Perfect Album episode coming your way next week on the show. Now, if you have a perfect album that you would like to share with the My Weekly Mixtape community, I am all ears. And if you send in an audio file to me, who knows, it might be featured on a future Perfect Album episode. Hit me up, myweeklymixtape@gmail.com. You can use the contact page at myweeklymixtape.com. You can hit me up on social media. Even though I have a love-hate relationship with it, I'm still there at myweeklymixtape at all the haunts. Or you can join the Mixtaper community at patreon.com/myweeklymixtape. It's free to join, and there's several tiers available if you'd like to support the show a little extra. All of it is appreciated, none of it expected. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you tune in, please be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like, leave a 5-star review, drop a comment, give the show a gold star, do all the things and help spread the word about My Weekly Mixtape to other music fans in your life. Once again, my name is Brian Colburn. This has been My Weekly Mixtape, and until next time, enjoy the tunes.